A rancher's search. The saddle groaned a lonesome tune under Dusty as he secured the cinch. The sound resonated in the early morning quiet, an echo of the hollowness inside him. A decade since Lily's peals of laughter had echoed through this barn, since her tiny fingers had stroked the velvety nose of his best mare. He squeezed his eyes shut, banishing the unwelcome memories that always surfaced before a long ride. A task awaited. He patted the rifle in its scabbard, a familiar weight against the hollowness that gnawed at him. It wasn't just the need for a new mount. It was the craving to move, to let the miles blur, to find oblivion in the rhythm of the trail. The truck sputtered to life, its beams slicing through the darkness as he reversed from a barn. A glance at the deserted swing set, its chains swaying in a mournful ballet, a silent monument to lost joy, and he forced his gaze away. Shifting gears, he headed for the Blackwood spread. Silas Blackwood's ranch stood in stark contrast to Dusty's own. The land was arid, the fencing broken down, the atmosphere thick with the acrid tang of manure and decay. A chorus of ragged barks greeted Dusty's truck as it rolled up the long, gravel path. Blackwood emerged from the dimness of a ramshackle barn, his features etched with suspicion. A gaunt figure of man, his eyes like slivers of obsidian, his voice a harsh rasp. Caldwell, he acknowledged, the name a clipped accusation. Blackwood, Dusty responded, his tone even. I heard you were selling horses. Blackwood grunted, his gaze raking over Dusty's truck. Heard you lost that prize mare. Bad luck. No pity colored his words, just a cold, calculating assessment. Dusty ignored the jab. Looking for a solid gelding. Good stamina. Got plenty, Blackwood said, with a flick of his wrist towards a dusty pen. But quality costs. He spat a stream of brown juice onto the parched ground. Come on. The corral was a disheartening sight. A dozen horses stood, heads low, ribs prominent beneath dull coats. Their eyes held a listless quality, their spirits subdued. Dusty ran his hand along the fence, the wood rough and splintered. These are the ones you're offering? Dusty asked, his voice devoid of inflection. Got a problem with that? Blackwood challenged, eyes narrowing. They look starved, Dusty observed, stating the obvious. They eat what they get, Blackwood countered. They ain't pets, friend. Dusty moved along the fence, his eyes lingering on each animal. A few showed potential, but none possessed the spark he sought, that wild heart that reminded him of Lily. He paused before a small, dun-colored mare, standing slightly apart from the others. Thin, yes, but her eyes held a flicker of defiance, a remnant of the wildness that had been extinguished in the rest. Something about her resonated with him, a quiet resilience. What about her? Dusty asked, indicating the dun mare. Blackwood snorted derisively. Waste of time. Bad leg. She ain't worth much more than glue. Dusty climbed into the corral, ignoring Blackwood's muttered objections. The mare flinched as he approached but didn't flee. He extended a hand slowly, allowing her to scent his palm. Her coat was coarse and dusty, but beneath the dirt, he sensed a gentle temperament. He ran his hand down her leg, feeling for the injury. A knot of scar tissue sat just above her fetlock, but didn't seem to hinder her gait. What happened? Stepped in a gopher hole, Blackwood said with a shrug. Broke it clean, healed crooked. Dusty looked into the mare's eyes, detecting a trace of pain, a ghost of past terror. I'll take her. Blackwood blinked, taken aback. You serious? I can give you a good deal on a sound horse. I want her, Dusty repeated, his voice firm. Blackwood shrugged, indifference etched on his face. Suit yourself, but don't come crying to me when she gives out on you. He named a price, surprisingly meager. He clearly wanted to be rid of her. Dusty nodded, retrieving his wallet. As he counted out the worn bills, he noticed something in his peripheral vision. A glimmer of metal in the shadowed recesses of the barn. A splash of color that seemed anomalous. He couldn't quite discern it, but it nagged at his senses, a sour note in the grim symphony of Blackwood's place. He filed the observation away, storing it in the back of his mind. An investigation would be in order upon his return to retrieve the horse. The girl in the stall. Silas hacked, a rasping cough that punctuated the air, and waved a hand toward the first paddock. Got some quarter horses here. Finest bloodlines, all homebred. Dusty leaned against the fence, the coarse wood biting into his forearm. The horses were impressive beasts, no denying it. Powerfully built, their forms sculpted with muscle, their coats reflecting the light even under the ranch's pervasive dust. He observed their movements, the liquid poetry of their strides, the keen intelligence shining in their dark eyes. Fine animals, Silas. That's clear. A pause lengthened. But they're not. What I'm after. He left the statement unfinished, lacking the words to articulate the hollow ache inside, a vast and echoing emptiness he doubted Silas Blackwood could ever comprehend. They proceeded, Silas launching into recitations of lineage and performance stats. Dusty offered nods of acknowledgement, but his focus remained riveted on the living creatures themselves. A showy chestnut stallion sporting a bold blaze, a solid bay mare radiating strength, a frisky colt full of youthful exuberance. Each possessed merit, yet none sparked that profound, visceral longing that consumed him. He found himself drawn toward the barn's far end, a section seemingly more derelict than the rest. The air hung heavy with the scent of musty hay and something else, an acrid tang that set his teeth on edge. One more, Silas stated, his voice devoid of inflection. He appeared hesitant to approach. She's difficult. The stall lay hidden in the deepest shadows. As Dusty's vision adjusted, he made her out. A commanding mare, larger than her counterparts, her coat the color of bleached sand. She stood with lowered head, muscles coiled tight, a glint of wildness blazing in her eyes. A jolt ran through him, a spark of recognition that warmed the iciness in his core. Something about her spirit resonated, something indomitable and untamed. Her story? Dusty asked, his voice a low murmur. Silas shrugged it off. Brought her in a few months back. A trade. Supposed to be some champion barrel racer gone bad. Wouldn't listen to a soul. Next to impossible to manage. Dusty drew nearer, extending a hand. The mare flinched, nostrils flaring wide, but held her ground. He spoke softly, his voice a calming drone. Easy, girl. Easy now. He felt the warmth of her breath on his palm, the tremor vibrating through her frame. Fear was present, yet so was something more, a flash of wit, a hint of defiance. He retrieved an apple from his pocket, offering it to her. After a moment's hesitation, she snatched it from his grip, crushing it with surprising force. It was then that he noticed her. Pressed into the corner of the stall, nearly swallowed by the gloom, sat a small girl. She was curled tight against the wall, knees hugging her chest, her eyes wide with petrified fear. Her hands were bound behind her with what appeared to be baling twine. Dusty's breath caught in his throat. The world swam, the ranch sounds receding into a muffled drone. He saw Lily. He saw that small, pale face, those bright blue eyes magnified by terror. He saw her blonde hair, the way it used to fall across her brow when she was afraid. No, not Lily. This girl was younger, tinier. Her hair a tangled curtain of brown. But the fear mirrored his memories, the same soul-shattering, gut-wrenching terror that had haunted his waking hours for a decade. Silas, Dusty began, his voice laced with menace. What in God's name is this? Silas shuffled, avoiding eye contact. Didn't see her there. Daisy, get out of the way. I told you to stay inside. Daisy. The girl remained motionless. Only her pleading eyes moved to connect with Dusty's. He crouched, his pulse hammering in his ears. It's all right, he said, his voice quivering slightly. I won't hurt you. He extended a hand, inching closer. She flinched, but didn't recoil. He touched her arm, his fingers brushing against the coarse weave of her dress. It was threadbare and ill-fitting, clearly too small. What's your name? He coaxed. She whispered, the sound nearly lost in the air. Daisy. Daisy, he echoed. Are you all right? She shook her head, brimming with tears. Dusty's gaze turned steely, shifting to Silas. Untie her. Silas hesitated, his eyes flitting nervously around the barn. Now hold on just a minute, Dusty. It's not what you think. Untie her, Dusty repeated, his voice sharp as shattered glass. Now! The temperature within the barn seemed to plummet. Silas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. He shuffled forward, his hands shaking as he grappled with the twine binding Daisy's wrists. Dusty never broke eye contact. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that this extended beyond a mere rundown ranch and a troublesome horse. This was something sinister, something deeply wrong, and he would not let it go unanswered. Not again. A patch from the past. Dusty's weathered hands shook as he reached out, his fingertips barely grazing the coarse weave of Daisy's dress. His focus bypassed the girl's tear-streaked face, the angry welts marring her wrists, snagged instead on a humble imperfection, a patch. A chaotic sunburst of mismatched fabric scraps radiated from a lone, pearly button, stitches gone awry. To one side, a miniature, misshapen tree, embroidered in what was once vibrant green thread, stood its ground. A pang resonated within him. The barn air, once neutral, now pressed down like a physical weight. A decade had passed since he last saw such a thing. A decade spent burying the memory. Now, resurrected from oblivion, it mocked him with its unsettling familiarity. His mind balked, refusing to complete the equation. He blinked, battling a rising tide of disorientation, but the image clung to his vision. He was transported. Lily, small for her age, balanced on his knee amidst the scent of sawdust and tanned leather. He'd been mending his saddle, and she, impatient, had demanded a project of her own. He'd unearthed a trove of salvaged fabric, remnants from old clothes destined for the scrap heap. "Make me something special, Papa," she'd begged, her eyes wide with childlike entreaty. Saying no to her had always been his weakness. He pictured guiding her small fingers, teaching her to thread the needle, to execute a simple running stitch. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth, a sign of intense concentration, as she painstakingly assembled the motley scraps. He'd assisted in shaping the sunburst, patiently disentangling the inevitable knots. The lopsided tree had been her inspiration. "Like the one by the creek," she declared, her voice brimming with youthful conviction. He'd chuckled, deeming it the most captivating arboreal form he'd ever witnessed. He'd anchored all with a button, a tiny iridescent keepsake from his mother's sewing box. The final touch, holding the colorful chaos together. He'd affixed that very patch to Lily's beloved denim jacket, her constant companion. The jacket she wore the day she vanished. His heart thrummed against his ribs, a frantic tattoo in the sudden hush of the barn. Doubt tussled with a rising, dreadful certainty. It couldn't be. An impossibility. Such patches. Surely they weren't unique? He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to banish the image, to obliterate the memory. Futile. The recollection blazed too fiercely, too vividly. He could almost feel the slight weight of Lily in his arms, the comforting warmth of her small frame. Opening his eyes, his gaze sharpened, hardening. He needed composure. He needed rationality. He couldn't allow himself to shatter, not now. This girl, Daisy could she possibly be? He swallowed hard, stifling the burgeoning question. Premature. He needed corroboration. He needed clarity. Methodically, he peeled back the layers of fear and bewilderment, zeroing in on the concrete details. The patch itself, the estimated age, the geographical context, the convergence pointed toward a single, horrifying deduction. A shiver coursed through him, a frigid undercurrent beneath his skin. His grip tightened on Daisy's arm, knuckles bone-white, his touch now imbued with a gentle reverence. "Daisy," he managed, his voice raspy with suppressed emotion. "Where did you find this dress?" Daisy recoiled slightly, her eyes widening in alarm. Hesitation clouded her features, as if words were a dangerous commodity. Finally, she breathed, The man. He gave it to me. A long time ago." "Silas," Dusty pressed, his voice a low-register threat. Daisy offered a single, spasmodic nod. "He said it was old, that it belonged to someone else." The air escaped Dusty's lungs in a rush. The barn seemed to reel around him. Someone else. Lily. He battled the tears that threatened to breach, the grief clawing at his throat. He wouldn't succumb. Not yet. He had a purpose, a vow to fulfill. He studied Daisy, truly saw her, perceiving not merely a terrified child, but a spark of something familiar in her gaze, an echo that resonated within his core. Hope, faint yet tenacious, began to unfurl within the darkness. He had to unearth the truth. He had to know, beyond all ambiguity. Rising to his feet, his gaze locked onto the distant silhouette of Silas, just emerging from the farmhouse. "Stay here," he instructed Daisy, his voice resolute. "I'll return momentarily." Deception and lies. Dusty leaned against the weathered fence, the scent of hay and horse manure thick in the air. He watched Silas toss a meager flake of hay into the pen, the horses jostling for position, their ribs showing too prominently beneath their winter coats. "Fine-looking horses, Silas," Dusty drawled, careful to keep his voice even, though they look a mite on the thin side. Silas jumped, startled. He hadn't noticed Dusty approach. They're just wintering hard," he stammered, avoiding Dusty's gaze. "Takes a lot to keep him fed this time of year." "That it does," Dusty agreed, pushing off the fence. "Say, I saw that little girl of yours earlier. Daisy, was it? Mighty helpful lass." Silas's face tightened, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "She ain't exactly mine. Took her in a few years back. Orphan, you see." Dusty raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "Orphan, eh? Tough break. Where'd you find her?" Silas shifted his weight, kicking at a loose stone with the toe of his worn boot. "Around. Just around. Didn't have nobody. I ain't one to turn away a stray." His voice wavered, lacking conviction. The lie hung heavy in the cold air. Dusty took a step closer, his gaze hardening. "Around where, Silas? This ain't exactly a town overflowing with lost children." Silas coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Don't rightly recall. Been a while. She's a good girl. Helps out around here." Dusty turned his attention to the barn, the one where he'd seen Daisy. "She seems quiet. Does she talk much?" Silas chuckled nervously, the sound grating. "She's a bit shy. Always been that way." Dusty let the silence stretch, the tension building between them. He knew Silas was lying. Every twitch, every averted glance screamed deception. He remembered the hope that had surged through him at the sight of the patch, the years of grief and unanswered questions coalescing into a burning certainty. He had to be careful. He couldn't spook Silas, not until he knew for sure. "Well," Dusty said finally, clapping Silas on the shoulder, the gesture feeling like a brand. "You're doing a good deed, Silas. Taking care of that little girl." He saw a flash of relief in Silas's eyes, quickly masked by a nervous smile. "Just trying to do what's right, Dusty." "That's all any of us can do," Dusty replied, his voice low. He glanced towards the barn again. As if on cue, Daisy appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide and pleading. She hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, holding a bucket. Their eyes met, and Dusty saw a flicker of recognition, a desperate hope mirroring his own. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but Silas cleared his throat loudly, and she quickly averted her gaze, busying herself with the bucket. "Daisy girl," Silas barked. "Get to your chores. Ain't got all day." Daisy flinched, her shoulders slumping. She hurried away, disappearing into the shadows of the barn. Dusty watched her go, his heart aching. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Daisy was Lily. His Lily, and Silas Blackwood was holding her captive, hiding her away. "I think I'll take a look at those horses now, Silas," Dusty said, his voice dangerously soft. "See if any of them catch my eye." He needed to get inside that barn, to get close to Daisy, to find a way to get her away from this monster. He needed to rescue his daughter. A risky plan. Good frame, Dusty assessed, circling the mare, his gaze lingering on her prominent ribs. The horse shuddered as he stroked her dusty flank. Undernourished, though, severely. Silas's gaze hardened. Ranch life ain't a picnic. She earns her keep. He spat a dark stream that nearly kissed Dusty's boot. Ignoring the gesture, Dusty knew he had to tread carefully. "What price did you have in mind?" he inquired, masking his impatience. The sooner he concluded this charade, the sooner he could set his true plan in motion. "$5, Silas declared, his voice gravelly. Dusty emitted a low whistle. "500 for skin and bones? I've seen prime stock fetch less." A calculated falsehood. Even in her current state, the mare possessed inherent value. But he needed to prolong the negotiation, solidify his guise as a prospective buyer, and scrutinize the layout. His eyes drifted toward the house, a silent sentinel on the horizon. Daisy was likely within, a thought that steeled his resolve. "She's got pedigree," Silas retorted, a flash of defensiveness igniting in his eyes. "And she's trained. A deal like this won't come twice." Dusty leaned against the fence, shielding his eyes from the glare. He noticed the latch, flimsy, begging to be picked. The fence, though aged, seemed sufficient to contain the animals. The stables, a lengthy, low structure to the west, remained shrouded in shadows. He needed a closer look to gauge their security. "Trained, you say?" Dusty drawled, extracting his pocket knife and absent-mindedly carving a sliver of wood. "Prove it," Silas grunted, seizing a halter. He guided the mare into a small, parched corral. With practiced ease, he saddled her. The mare stood compliant, as if resigned to her fate. Mounting, he gently urged her into a slow jog. She moved with fluid grace, her emaciated form hinting at dormant power. Dusty observed, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. The stables were far enough from the house that any commotion would likely go unheard by Silas. He'd seen no other cowboys. It was just Silas and Daisy. He needed a diversion, something to lure Silas away from the house, away from the stables. "All right," Dusty conceded, halting the mare. "Her gait is acceptable. Still, she lacks vital substance. I'll offer $350. Silas's features clouded. "Don't waste my breath. $450, and that's my last word." $400, Dusty countered, extending his hand. Silas hesitated, then spat again, the projectile landing even closer this time. "Done." Dusty shook his hand, the grip surprisingly firm. "Gotta get my truck. It's parked back up the road." "It's right there." Silas pointed to Dusty's pickup, conspicuously visible in the distance. "Right," Dusty said, trying to sound casual. "I need the trailer." As Dusty headed toward his truck, he subtly scanned the ground, seeking a potential weapon. A length of pipe, a sizable rock. Nothing presented itself. He'd have to rely on his cunning and on Blue. Reaching the truck, he opened the door, Blue's tail whipping excitedly against the seat. "Easy, fella," Dusty murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We got a job ahead of us." Dusty grabbed his jacket from the back seat, draping it over his arm to conceal the small wrench he invariably carried in the pocket. He leaned in close to Blue. "Remember the drill? One long, keen whistle. Head straight for the stables and raise hell, got it?" Blue whined softly, his knowing eyes locked on Dusty's. He understood. He always did. Dusty started the truck, turning it to face the road. "Just getting ready to hitch the trailer," he announced to Silas, who watched him with a skeptical gaze. Dusty knew he had to act swiftly, decisively. Each tick of the clock mattered. He drove back toward Silas, stopping a few yards away. "Just need to fetch the bill of sale," he explained, exiting the vehicle. He approached Silas, his hand still hidden within his jacket. "One last thing," Dusty said, halting a few feet away. He met Silas's gaze squarely. "I need to see the horse's papers. Proof of ownership." Silas's eyes narrowed into dark slits. "What's it to you? You buying or just wasting my time?" "I'm buying the horse," Dusty stated, his tone even and firm. "But I need assurance she's not hot." Silas hesitated, then turned and began walking toward the house. "Fine," he grumbled. "I'll fetch him." As Silas turned his back, Dusty put 2 fingers to his lips and unleashed a sharp whistle. It pierced the tranquil air, a signal, a promise, and an act of defiance. Now, the moment had come to execute his perilous plan. The test ride and the signal. "Gotta see what she's got under the hood," Dusty muttered, his gaze pinned to the mare. He avoided Silas's hawkish stare. It felt like a brand on his skin. A short jaunt, just to the boundary line. Need to be sure she won't pitch me before I get there. Silas's lips, thin as knife blades, stretched into a mirthless approximation of a smile. Boundary's a good stretch. She ain't a spring chicken anymore. Just want to get a feel for her, Dusty countered, his tone brooking no dissent. He stroked the mare's neck, feeling the quiver beneath her sparse coat. The scent of fear radiated from her, mirroring the anxiety churning within him. Silas's shrug was abrupt, unsettling. Suit yourself, but mind you don't wander too far. This land isn't always hospitable. Dusty nodded, his focus already elsewhere. He swung into the saddle, the aged leather groaning under his weight. He adjusted his grip on the reins, supple and worn from years of use. Silas's gaze burned into him. "Blue, stay put," he murmured, almost inaudibly. The blue heeler remained at his heel, tail tapping a soft rhythm against the packed earth. With a gentle pressure, Dusty nudged the mare forward. She responded with surprising eagerness, her hooves stirring up dust devils. As they pulled away from the barn, he felt Silas's stare boring into his back, a palpable weight of suspicion. Dusty kept the pace measured, allowing the mare to stretch her legs. The wind quickened, carrying the perfume of sun-baked grass and the promise of distant storms. He glanced back. Silas remained, a gaunt sentinel against the backdrop of the decaying ranch house. This was it. Dusty swallowed hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. He fixed his thoughts on Blue, his steadfast companion, now a small, immobile figure near the stables. Direct eye contact was out of the question. It would betray him. Implicit trust flowed between them. Years of unspoken communication formed an unbreakable bond. Reaching the crest of a low hill, marking the edge of Silas's property, he reined the mare to a standstill. Before him, the terrain sprawled, a tapestry of arid fields and tangled scrub. The air tasted of grit and decay. He inhaled deeply, relishing the fleeting sense of isolation. Certainty was paramount. He needed to signal Blue. He casually surveyed the landscape, feigning appraisal. Subtly, he rotated his left hand, palm facing the barn, fingers twitching in a nearly invisible pattern. A series of minute taps, a cipher they'd shared since Blue was a pup. 3 staccato, 1 sustained, 2 staccato. Locate her. Liberate her. The command was a whisper, a silent dialogue exclusive to them. He dared not look back to gauge Blue's comprehension. Faith was his only recourse. He had to have faith. Turning the mare, he started back toward the ranch. As he neared, he noted Silas hadn't budged, still a statue of suspicion, arms folded, his expression inscrutable. Dusty dismounted, handing the reins to Silas. "She's got some fire in her," he remarked, his voice carefully devoid of inflection. "Needs conditioning and care, but she's got potential." Silas accepted the reins, his eyes narrowed to slits. "So, are you buying or just stringing me along?" "Mulling it over," Dusty replied, his gaze sweeping the ranch, seeking any trace of Blue. He forced himself to project an air of nonchalance, masking the growing unease that clawed at him. Where was he? He could discern the faint sounds of the ranch, the squeal of the windmill, the lonely cry of a crow overhead. But no sign of Blue, no sign of Daisy. He needed a stall. "Tell you what," Dusty began, extracting a pouch of tobacco. He meticulously rolled a cigarette, his hands betraying none of the inner turmoil. "Let me sleep on it. I'll give you my answer come morning." Silas grunted, his expression unchangingly guarded. "Think you could just waltz in and out as you please?" "Got no reason to linger," Dusty said, his tone level. "Unless you're hiding something." The challenge hung in the air, an unspoken clash of wills. A spark flickered in Silas's eyes, a fleeting glimpse of something concealed before he masked it with a contemptuous curl of his lip. "Get off my land," he hissed, his voice venomous. "And don't return without the coin." Dusty nodded, turning away. He compelled himself to maintain a deliberate pace, resisting the urge to bolt. He had to believe in Blue's unwavering dedication. He had to believe Daisy was within reach. Reaching the edge of the property, he risked a final glance. Silas was still observing him, a stark silhouette against the dying light. But this time, Dusty discerned something more, a fleeting movement near the stables, a momentary flash of white fur. Blue. He was underway. Blue's bravery. The rhythmic thud of the mare's hooves against the parched earth was a deceptive lullaby. Dusty kept his eyes fixed on the distant fence line, but his mind was a whirlwind, calculating the time, the distance, Blue's speed. He risked a glance back. Silas, a granite statue on horseback, remained a constant, unnerving presence. Dust swirled, coating everything in a fine, reddish film. The air, thick with the scent of sage and dry grass, felt heavy, expectant. He coughed, the dust catching in his throat. Silas remained silent, his gaze unwavering, a hawk eyeing its prey. Blue, invisible now in the sparse brush, was the key. Dusty's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the reins, another silent command. "Find her, boy. Get her out." Blue, a shadow among shadows, moved with a practiced ease honed by years of working the ranch. His paws, silent on the dusty ground, carried him towards the stables. The sun beat down on his thick fur, but he felt only the urgency of Dusty's silent plea. He skirted the main house, keeping low, his nose twitching, pulling in the scent of hay, horses, and something else, something faintly familiar and laced with fear. The stables loomed, a dark rectangle against the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. The air around them buzzed with flies. Blue paused, flattening himself against the rough-hewn wall, his keen ears picking up the muffled sounds within. The restless shifting of horses, the creak of leather, and a whimper. He crept along the wall, testing the wind, his senses on high alert. No sign of Silas. The ranch hands, if there were any, were likely taking a midday respite. This was his chance. He slipped inside, a silent dart of brown and white. The interior of the stables was cool and dim, a welcome reprieve from the scorching sun. The air hung thick with the smell of manure and sweat. Horses shifted in their stalls, their eyes wide, watching him with mild curiosity. And then he saw her. In the far stall, huddled against the back wall, was the girl. Daisy. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, were fixed on him. She was tied, her wrists bound to a post, her ankles similarly secured. Rope bit into her skin, chafing raw against her delicate flesh. A low growl rumbled in Blue's chest, a primal surge of protectiveness. He recognized the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability in her posture. He moved towards her cautiously, his tail wagging tentatively, trying to reassure her. Daisy flinched, then stilled, her gaze searching his. She seemed to recognize something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, a promise of help. A faint smile touched her lips. He nudged her hand with his nose, a soft, comforting gesture. Then he set to work. The rope was thick, coarse. He tested it with his teeth, finding a weak spot near the knot. He began to chew, his powerful jaws working tirelessly, the rasp of the rope against his teeth the only sound in the otherwise silent stable. Daisy watched him, her breath held captive in her chest. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, fluttered within her. She trusted this dog, this creature of loyalty and kindness. He was her only chance. Splinters of rope flew as Blue worked, his focus unwavering. The air filled with the acrid smell of frayed hemp. He chewed and chewed, his muscles aching, his gums sore. The sun streamed through a crack in the wall, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, highlighting the intensity of his task. Finally, with a satisfying snap, the first strand gave way. Then another and another. The rope loosened, then parted. He moved to her other wrist, repeating the process, his determination fueled by her silent gratitude. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each strand severed was a victory, a step closer to freedom. Finally, both her wrists were free. He moved to her ankles, repeating the process with the same relentless focus. She watched him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her heart pounding with a hope she dared not voice. The ranch had been her prison, her existence reduced to servitude and fear. Now a dog, a simple ranch dog, was offering her a chance at something more. With a final tug, the last rope snapped. Daisy was free. Confrontation and truth. Beneath Dusty, the mare's muscles coiled and sprang, a familiar cadence that usually settled his frayed edges. Not today. Daisy's pallid face, the angry wheels on her wrists, visions burned into his memory. He recognized the look, the vacant despair of the captive. He spurred the mare onward, a surge of velocity erupting as her hooves flung pebbles behind. He needed answers. Understanding clawed at him, reining the mare about. Heedless of her sharp protest, he steered her back towards the ranch house, his gut twisting tighter with each bound. The sun, a molten hammer, beat down, transforming the kicked-up dust into an ochre haze that coated his skin. Grit stung his tongue, rasped his throat, but he pressed on. Silas lounged by the corral, propped against the time-worn fence, a cigarette clamped between his lips. He observed Dusty's approach, his expression an inscrutable mask. As the distance closed, Silas straightened, eyes hardening. Dusty hauled the mare to a jarring halt, the abruptness causing her to prance. He landed smoothly, ignoring the complaint of his joints. He advanced on Silas, his gaze unwavering, blue, sensing the darkening mood, shadowed him silently, a low growl churning in his chest. "Where is she, Silas?" The query rasped from Dusty's throat, a low growl edged with a sharpness that made Silas recoil. Silas flicked the cigarette stub to the dirt and ground it out. "Where's who, Caldwell? Still thinking about that horse?" "Spare me the games," Dusty snapped, his voice rising a notch. "I know what you've done." A dry, humorless croak escaped Silas's lips. "And that would be offering a fair price for prime livestock?" "Lily," Dusty spat the name like venom. "My daughter. You abducted her." Silas's face drained of color, the skin stretched taut over his angular bones. He started to speak, thought better of it, and swallowed thickly. Briefly, a flicker, was it fear, remorse, danced in the depths of Silas's gaze. "You're delusional," Silas finally choked out, his voice strained thin. "Lost your marbles, Caldwell." "Have I?" Dusty advanced, invading Silas's space. Blue's growl deepened, a palpable vibration in the air. Daisy, stabled, bound, terrified, just as Lily must have been. Silas's facade crumbled. He raked a hand through his sparse hair, his eyes skittering nervously around the yard. "Get off my land, Caldwell. You're trespassing." "Tell me the truth, Silas," Dusty pressed, his voice a dangerous rumble. "Where is Lily?" The dam burst. "All right, Phoenix." Silas roared, his voice cracking. "Yes, I took her. 10 years gone. I needed the cash. The ranch was bleeding dry, the bank breathing down my neck." He began to pace, his agitation spiraling. "I thought it'd be clean, a quick exchange. Nobody gets hurt." Dusty stood rigid, the breath knocked out of him. 10 years. A decade of searching, of hope dwindling, of silent prayers. And all this time, the ransom. Dusty rasped, his throat constricting. Silas emitted a harsh, mirthless sound. "The ransom?" Blew up in my face. Something spooked him. The handoff went south. I never saw a damn penny. And then it was too late to give her back. I panicked, kept her hid, moved her around. I was going to bring her back, I swear. But then, well, you know how it is. "No," Dusty whispered, his voice thin. "I have no idea how it is." His fist clenched, knuckles gleaming white. "Where is she, Silas? Where's my daughter?" Silas flinched back. I don't know," he stammered, avoiding Dusty's piercing gaze. "After the ransom failed, I passed her on. Someone who could care for her better than I could." "Who?" Dusty demanded, closing the distance. Blue's canines gleamed, a silent promise. Silas cowered, his back pressed against the fence. I can't tell you. They'd bury me." Dusty's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're lying." "No, I swear it. I don't know where she is now. Haven't laid eyes on her since." Desperation laced Silas's trembling voice. Dusty studied him, his heart a heavy weight in his chest. He longed to believe him, yearned for it. But something in Silas's averted gaze, the nervous tremor in his jaw, screamed deception. Behind him, the mare shuffled, sensing the electric tension. The ranch yard, once a canvas of promise, now felt like a constricting cell, imprisoning him within a nightmare of his own making. Reunion and healing. The confession hung, fetid and heavy like spoiled silage, permeating the barn air. Dusty's grief transmuted into incandescent fury. Silas, puffed up by his own wickedness, grinned. Gonna weep, old-timer? Should have coughed up the damn ransom. A lifetime of stifled anguish detonated in Dusty's actions. He launched himself forward before Silas could react, channeling decades of bottled-up emotion into a single, skull-rattling punch. The blow slammed into Silas's mandible, sending him stumbling backward into a hay bale barricade. He regained his feet, spewing a torrent of invective. Snatching a nearby pitchfork, he brandished it with clumsy aggression. "Get off my land, you trespassing!" Dusty evaded the awkward jabs with surprising nimbleness. A sharp kick to Silas's wrist sent the pitchfork clattering onto the packed earth floor. Quicker than his age suggested, Dusty tackled him, driving the wind from his lungs as he pinned him. "Where is she?" Dusty bellowed, his voice a ravaged rasp. "Where's Lily?" Silas, struggling beneath Dusty's weight, spat a glob of saliva onto the dirt. "Already told you, I don't know a thing." Dusty's grip tightened, a roaring pulse echoing in his skull. He wouldn't commit murder, but he'd restrain him until justice arrived. "You're going to tell them everything." Blue, agitated, yipped and circled, his tail a frantic metronome. He sensed the volatile energy, the palpable hostility arcing between the two men. Dusty hauled Silas toward the farmhouse, Blue snapping playfully at the rancher's boots. Using Silas's own phone, he contacted the sheriff, his tone devoid of inflection as he detailed the abduction and Silas's admission. He trussed Silas to a solid oak chair in the living room, using ropes scavenged from the shed. The rancher continued his string of obscenities, but Dusty remained deaf to his tirade, his gaze fixed on the weathered planks of the barn. Daisy, Lily, the identities blurred, past and present merging in his weary mind. The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, their faces etched with grim determination. They hauled Silas away, his enraged shouts echoing across the farmyard as he was frog-marched to the patrol car. Dusty watched them leave, a cavernous emptiness settling in his chest. He still had a vow to uphold. He returned to the barn, the air redolent with the scent of dried grass and equine sweat. Daisy remained huddled in the stall, her eyes wide pools of apprehension. He knelt before her, softening his voice. "It's okay, Daisy. He's gone now." He extended a hand, and after a hesitant pause, she accepted it. Her small hand trembled in his large one. He led her from the enclosure, from the shadowy interior of the barn, into the warm embrace of the sunlight. As she emerged, Dusty glimpsed a spark of recognition in her gaze. Something familiar ignited within him. Lily. He cradled her face, studying her features intently. The harsh years had obscured her resemblance to the child he remembered, but now, illuminated by the sun, he saw it. The set of her chin, the angle of her eyes, the slight furrow in her brow when perplexed. "Lily," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Daisy, Lily, regarded him, her eyes a bewildering mix of fear and uncertainty. She shook her head fractionally. "Daisy," she replied softly. "My name's Daisy." A wave of sorrow crashed over Dusty. He understood it would require patience, perhaps years, but he wouldn't falter. He would resurrect his Lily. He took her hand again, gently guiding her toward his pickup. "Come on, Daisy. Let's go home." The journey back to the ranch unfolded in silence. Lily gazed out the window, her small hand nestled securely in Dusty's. Blue, sprawled across the back seat, panted contentedly, his head resting gently on Lily's lap. As they approached the homestead, Lily gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Her eyes widened, and she clutched Dusty's hand with newfound strength. I know this, she whispered. He assisted her from the cab, and she stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the scene. The undulating pastures, the distant hills, the comforting aroma of the land. Deeply suppressed memories stirred within her. He led her inside, the house imbued with echoes of their shared history. Lily drifted through the rooms, her fingertips tracing the contours of the furniture, her gaze sweeping across the walls. A worn photo album rested on a coffee table. Dusty opened it, displaying images of her childhood. Lily stared at the faded prints, a deep concentration creasing her forehead. She pointed to a snapshot of Dusty carrying her on his shoulders. That's me. Dusty nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's you, Lily. That's you and me. A tentative smile blossomed on her face. Lily, she repeated, testing the name. I think I remember a little. That night, Lily slept in her old bedroom, a sanctuary unseen for a decade. Dusty sat vigil outside her door, listening to her tranquil respirations, a fragile hope blooming in his heart. The path ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Lily would require time to mend, to recall, to rediscover herself. But Dusty would remain at her side, unwavering in his support. He would shower her with all the affection and encouragement she needed. He gazed up at the celestial expanse, a silent supplication escaping his lips. He had reclaimed his daughter, and he would never relinquish her again. Their family was once again complete, and together they would begin to heal.